Hey guys, so we're going to start up again with the poem Proof Rock, the long poem by T.S. Eliot. I'm going to do a quick review over the epigraph and then we'll move forward. This should move along a lot quicker than yesterday's video when we were just talking about the theme and how the epigraph sets everything up for you as a reader. But having said that, this should be a lot quicker. I'm thinking maybe 2 or 3 videos and then we'll be through with the poem. Okay, so this is the page we left off at. And so some quick points to remember. This is in Italian. The poet Eliot is not expecting you to be able to read it. It's an added benefit if you're able to figure that out. Okay, so he's not questioning your intelligence, but he is using a lot of profound intellectual academic references. Okay, and once you figure out where he's gaining all this information, it makes the whole connection of theme and imagery and plot and title, it all connects together. So again, this is establishing the fact Prufrock is well read. He's probably thinking this phrase in his head. He knows of Dante. He knows the original Italian for Dante. Okay. Now, this is the first stanza. So line 1 officially begins here. You don't count the epigraph as the poem. It's separate from the poem. Okay, so I'm going to read this stanza and then we'll talk about it. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask what is it. Let us go and make our visit. Okay, so this is just the first stanza. Immediately you're being hit with a mood. And already, not knowing what the epigraph's about, let's pretend I didn't go over that. Not knowing what the epigraph is about, this first stanza is defying the expectations of the poem itself. Okay, so remember the key word in the full title is love song. When we look just at the first stanza, an average reader should be saying, wait a minute, this is going in a new direction. Okay, the first line, you feel like it is moving and showing you a love song, but by the second line, something's wrong. Okay, so let's start at the first. It says you and I. Again, typically in a love song, you have the lover and the lovee. And that's the whole theme, the whole point of the song, of the poem. In this case, Prufrock is actually talking to himself. This is stream of consciousness. He's thinking in his own head. That doesn't make sense, does it? But he's thinking, stream of consciousness. So whenever you see the word you, it means himself. There is one exception to this rule, which we'll get to later, if not today, the next video, where the you, it is often discussed, does he mean a person right in front of him? So we'll get to that at one point. But until I say so, you and I means me, myself, and I. He's just thinking in his head, talking directly at himself. Okay, so where this starts falling apart and becoming an exception to the rule, is when Prufrock starts talking about evening. Timing is very important in poetry, especially at this time period. When you mention evening, that is a time for crime. It is a time for murder. It's a time for anger. As I put down on this side here, early morning is traditionally the time for love songs. Usually it's as the sun is just about to break the horizon. You and your lover are holding hands. There's dew all over the place. You're in a garden. The birds are singing like crazy, and the sun is slowly rising, and you are totally in love. That is the typical scene. Springtime. Okay. But in this case, we got the total opposite. It's evening, and he's presenting half-deserted streets like alleyways. Okay? He's talking about this patient who's etherized upon a table. So there's a lot of elements just in this one stanza that is contradicting anything about love songs, the traditional expectations. Going back to the patient specifically, when you have a situation like that, okay, the word etherized is basically the gas they give you to knock you out cold. So, when you're knocked out cold, I ask this here, who then is in control? The physician is in control, not the patient. Okay? So let's look at the structure of this sentence. There's two ways of reading it. Okay? The first way, the creative, poetical fashion of the beauty of the language, let's say, it's a great simile. He's saying, let us go take a walk when it's evening, specifically at that point when twilight is spreading really quickly across the horizon line. It's becoming dark very soon, very hastily, briefly. So again, the opposite of the love song in the morning. This is in the evening when the sun is set and it's becoming really, really dark. So the evening is spread out against the sky. But if you follow the structure of the way these lines are being read, he's also saying, let us go take a walk so that we feel like a patient etherized upon a table. So we have that numb, druggy, knocked out, sort of out of control sensation that happens when you're having surgery. He feels, to an extent, and this is going to be contradicted throughout the poem, but he's saying he has too much control in his life. He wants to have no control over his life. Okay? So keep in mind I said he's going to contradict this in a second. Okay. Okay, so again, the us is me, myself, and I, wandering through half-deserted streets. So this next line, I love lines 6 and 7. You're going to think I'm a little twisted, but I like lines 6 and 7. Two things. If we were face-to-face in class, I would pinpoint, let's say Sawyer. Sawyer, I'm looking at you in class and I'm saying, what does one do in a one-night cheap hotel? And Sawyer would laugh and tell me what one does in a one-night cheap hotel. Okay. So basically what's happening here, the protagonist, Prufrock, is thinking dirty little thoughts. He's thinking of one-night stands, quickie sex, prostitutes. Okay? So again, this is a contradiction. We're not talking about pure love with your partner standing outside in the spring sunshine. We're talking about dirty sex, dirty, immoral actions. Again, the opposite of what a Victorian poem would be. Um, so one night cheap hotels, that's where the prostitutes are. That's where you pay by the hour, so forth and so on. Uh, line 7 just picks up with that theme. Sawdust restaurants. This is low-end, working-class, warehouse district restaurants. Okay, they don't want to have to clean up that frequently in these type of establishments. So what they do, they spread sawdust on the floor. If somebody spills a drink, or worse, has had too much to drink and they throw up, or if other bodily functions don't, or if other bodily functions happen unplanned, all you have to do is scoop up the mess and put down fresh sawdust. There's no health code violations, There's nothing to be worried about. And likewise, the famous oyster shells. Every naughty schoolboy reference to the female anatomy is in here. Oyster shells is, as I put right here, a yonic symbol. Okay, so I can talk more about that one-on-one if you need me to. But basically, throughout this whole piece, there's going to be references to the female anatomy, and it's a Freudian act. And in the middle of the poem, he's going to have phallic imagery. So just keep that in mind. But the whole purpose of this lines 6 and 7, it's establishing class divisions. I'll repeat this in another segment when I record it. But basically, Prufrock is upper class. He's not nobility. He's just below that. He has money. He has class. He can be successful in life. But for some reason, he's flawed. And he knows a lot about prostitutes. Okay, so he's spending his money probably on prostitutes. And this is the type of environment where one would find prostitutes. So again, you got the imagery being repeated of what it's like in this district of town. It's the perfect scene for a murder mystery. Okay, for a mugging, for a rape, for a knifing incident. So it's this type of atmosphere. And line 10, notice it says to lead you to an overwhelming question. And then you have the ellipses. So the ellipses are very important. As I say here, line 10, the overwhelming question is never asked in the poem. He'll talk about a lot of stuff. He'll ask a lot of questions. In fact, there's one right here. What is it? That is not the overwhelming question. There are 2 or 3 possibilities of what the overwhelming question is, and we'll tackle that later. But just so you know, he never officially will ask the specific question. He's just avoiding the question. And the more we talk about this, you'll figure out why he's avoiding the question. Okay, and then finally, notice, you might have picked up on it already, you've got some end rhyme sounds. You got I and sky, it, visit, okay, argument, intent. So This is an example of free verse. The rhyming is scattered. It has no pattern. It's without a standard meter. It's very rhythmical. It is iambic. You got that steady pulse throughout the whole thing. But for the most part, this is free verse. There is no form being established here. Okay. Winding down for this section, one other thing I want to point out, going back to the oyster shells, before I forget, that is establishing a motif that is throughout the whole piece. He'll start talking about sea imagery and then step back. He'll introduce something new about sea imagery and then he'll step back. So again, there's a lot of imagery, Freudian imagery associated with the ocean or with sea. Okay. So again, if you need me to talk about that more, we can privately. Also, when you start visualizing the rest of the poem as we go along, think of this as a museum. It helped me get It helped me get through the poem the first time. Yes, it is the thoughts of Prufrock, but if you visualize yourself as a reader wandering through a museum without a pattern, without a path, going from room to room to room to room to room, and you're bumping into different things in each room that don't connect. Okay, that's a good way of visualizing this. Each stanza represents a different room in Prufrock's head. So he himself is wandering all over the place without a purpose. And that is another major point here. There is no real purpose behind Prufrock's thoughts, behind his actions. He has motivation, but no purpose. Okay. And a little pun that's going on here. Stanza in Italian means room. So each of these stanzas, like I said, is a different room. So more ways than one, you got an association there. Okay, so we got through that stanza. We're down to 2 minutes for that stanza. I'm going to pause, and that's it for this session. We'll start with the next stanza in the next video. So I hope everything's going fine. Let me know.